Our parent Lorenzo was, in his day, the wisest of all the Alberti clan, among other things, in the way he raised his children, and, as you remember, Carlo, he reminded us never to be idle, in public or in private, and never to seem so. We were brought up in line with our father's excellent ideas, and in a manner proper to free men. In accordance with his teaching, you have always been active, both in business and in continued reading, while I, who dedicated myself to scholarship and put it above everything else, would give up any activity rather than let a day pass without reading or writing. Thanks to our upbringing, I'm happy to say that, guided by the great writers, we bore with unperturbed spirit certain evils that long afflicted us and prudently avoided others. Our education, however, was worth our hard work not just because it benefited us personally, but, more importantly, I think, because it may allow us to meet the high expectations of our friends. Over time, those who have always cared about my honor and reputation have been increasingly eager to see some results from the long hours at my desk, to judge my progress by the fruit of my hard work and studious zeal. For my own sake, and my people's, therefore, I have meditated and thought long and hard, searching with all my ingenuity for a subject I could treat adequately, and which would prove the quality of my intellect, so as to satisfy them if it lay within me. But nothing came to mind that had not been beautifully dealt with by the divinely inspired classical authors, so that no one of our time, however learned, could deal with it better than they, nor did there seem to be some topic left of the kind they had treated, that I could handle well and with grace. The ancients had encompassed all serious and comic material, leaving to us only the opportunity to read them and the obligation to admire. Older contemporaries of ours have seized on a few subjects that lay hidden, perhaps overlooked by the ancients, and thus gained honor and fame, if one wants glory. However, one must be willing to write something that is not perfect, and ideal rather than allow oneself to grow old in erudite silence. What to do? Would it be good enough to imitate Isocrates, the rhetorician, said to have produced splendid orations praising Busiris, a horrible tyrant, and condemning Socrates, the best and most venerable philosopher? I do believe that many things are permitted to the young for the sake of mental exercise, though they would not be proper for mature scholars. These indeed have traced the character of princes and the deeds of republics, as well as the outcome of wars. We younger people, if at least we offer something new, ought not to have to worry about severe and, so to speak, excessive criticism from those who listen like mutes or little children with hearing too sensitive to sounds, to distinguished meaning, as if a learned man need only having discriminating ears without bothering to understand. We cannot hope, by great application to study, to attain the glory of ancient eloquence and elegance. Even if we tried for a long time with all our powers, we could attain only mediocre success. We should nonetheless maintain our habit of intellectual exercise, not expecting to please critics who have spent their lives learning only that nothing is worth their praise, but hoping to satisfy my own family and friends. By this gift may we win their greater acceptance and love. If beyond that our work is not wholly rejected by scholars, we shall consider ourselves well received. Following our custom and obeying the requests of family, therefore I have put forth this little treatise on the use and abuse of books. I thought it will please you, my brother, both because I have acted courteously toward my people, and because, in this instance, I have hit on a topic that is neither commonplace nor already generally understood. The results of devotion to books I know from personal experience, having practiced it at every period of my life to the present. I earnestly beg you, my brother, if I may borrow your own phrasing in Ephebus, to read this little book of ours, correct it according to your own unswerving judgment, and, by your emendations, kindly make it better, and more beautiful. I have often heard distinguished scholars say things about scholarship that could really make anyone give up the desire to engage in it. Among other points, for there were many and varied arguments, they were open about the fact that they themselves, though at one time they had chosen to study books, would, if they could start over, gladly take up another kind of life. I was far from believing that they were sincere, these men who had never spent any period of their lives not engaged in the study of texts, and not only did I believe that they had spoken quite differently from what they felt, but I actually blamed them a little bit for it. I thought it wrong for learned men to discourage younger students, and also wrong for highly intelligent men to continue on a course if they did not really believe in it. I diligently interrogated many men of learning and discovered that in fact almost all were of the same mind, namely, estranged from the very study of books to which they had devoted their lives. Yet, for some reason, I remain unconvinced, despite their authority and arguments. While they pronounced that there were many disadvantages to a life of study, I consider it the most joyful of vocations. While they thought the cultivation of knowledge preserved in books should rank lowest among all disciplines, I thought that it ought to be considered the highest. I dedicated myself completely to scholarship, omitting no aspect of generally admired learning, striving to master all subjects by hard work, meticulous care, and long hours, applying myself with the utmost zeal and scrupulous care. I cannot imagine a higher value or purpose. I thought it the duty of a lofty soul to take on strenuous labors and tolerate hardship, long hours, and all the other cares and difficulties that accompany study, both for the sake of knowledge itself and in hope of honor and fame, which, I believe, could come to me through erudition. I adhered to this opinion and this goal, a very worthy way of thinking, but not very realistic. As long as I remain ignorant of what the ways of the world actually demand of us. When by repeated experience and by having to deal with society I finally came to see the prevailing situation more clearly, I must confess that some of those arguments concerning the disadvantages of a scholar's life, which I was accustomed to reject, despise, and oppose in public, began to convince me inwardly. For I realized that they were indeed to a great extent true. The life of those who devoted themselves to books was actually more arduous and more unavoidably troubling than any other, and any other was far more likely to be easy and fortunate. Eventually, I could hardly understand what serious students were hoping to accomplish with such strenuous effort and such an outpouring of energy, unless perhaps they derived from books some wisdom which enabled them to bear hardships that would have broken anybody else. I am, in fact, convinced that I myself, because of my years of study, lost my health and broke down from overworking, besides being robbed of all my worldly goods, but of my misfortunes elsewhere. Let this suffice for now to indicate why I don't altogether despise the feelings of those who, as they reported, would prefer to have spent their lives doing anything rather than reading. Yet, having discovered that the study of books is not, as I used to think, the way to personal advantage, I have not swerved so far from my old position as to think scholarship should simply be abandoned. I now believe that the study of books must be based on the conviction that, compared to knowledge of the loftiest matters, the goods of fortune hardly matter, and that we will be content with wisdom alone. If I here present my views on the life of learning, it will not, I think, bore you or waste your time. For you will see that it is a mistake to promise yourself something from these studies other than a free and unprejudiced understanding. You'll also be able to judge for yourself the utter folly of those who plunge into immense labors required by scholarship because they want wealth, social recognition, or similar vain and transitory rewards. For the life men of learning live is necessarily hard and harsh. By this I mean the ones who, as they should, abandon all other things for the sake of intellectual work. No art, however minor, demands less than total dedication if you want to excel in it. What we know to be true of all other arts is most especially true of reading and writing. There is no freedom from striving at any age. We see those who dedicate themselves to study, poring over books, as the expression goes, from an early age, and left alone by everybody. We see them worn out and exhausted by anxious worrying about the rod, the teachers, the struggle to learn, and by their constant assiduous reading. They often look anemic and lethargic for their age. In the next period, youth, when we are told that we can expect to see joy and happiness in boys' faces, look at their pallor, their melancholy, how in every aspect of their physical bearing, as they come out of their daily imprisonment in schools and libraries, they seem repressed and almost crushed. Poor creatures! How exhausted, how listless they are, thanks to long hours of wearisome reading, lack of sleep, too much mental effort, too much deep concerns. Anyone with a bit of humanity in him tends to pity their relentless toil, or angrily condemn their folly, especially if they have high hopes of being eventually rewarded by fortune. And rightly so, for outside of knowledge itself, no success, as measured by fortune's goods, is going to come their way. They are very mistaken if they waste their labor and ambition on this particular pursuit, while a life led along other lines could, with no more labor and striving, probably raise them to the highest pinnacle of financial and social success. For the primary transitory goods that mortals value are wealth for some, public recognition for others, and for still others, pleasure. Each of these is the object of intense competition. What else one may expect to gain from fortune? I don't know. I believe there is nothing else fortune can bestow on us that anyone could want. From these prizes, however, scholars are excluded. To make this perfectly clear, I shall show first how much they get to enjoy themselves, second, what fortunes fall in their laps, and finally, what honors are likely to be showered upon them. Our whole discourse will be succinct and brief considering the size of the subject, since its purpose is not to puff up with rhetoric, but simply to set forth the facts concerning the advantages and disadvantages of study, and in view of these, to give good advice as to the right way to act. I shall omit many turns of speech that might move you and many kinds of argument, for I do not want even to appear to be trying to mock the disciplines or to be eager to expose learning to scorn. For those who expect something from reading and study besides erudition and wisdom, it will be useful, I think, to learn how things really are, to follow our argument and consequently turn away from their mistaken path. To frugal and prudent students, on the other hand, it will be a valuable reminder that books can give them true guidance and a real understanding of things, while all the rest is not worth thinking about. So, let us proceed. First, here's my opinion. Anyone who is poor lacks the means, or at least the best way, to procure pleasures, that is, money, and therefore cannot fulfill the requirements of any discipline with much pleasure. For if pleasure is, as they say, that which moves the senses and delights the heart with a certain happy feeling, and if all the things by which the senses are pleased, such as good things to eat, or fine ointments and other luxuries, are unobtainable without money, how then will a poor man be able to keep himself supplied with them? And how can he be happy when his poverty makes him inclined to grief rather than delight? It is obvious that luxuries belong by nature to the rich and the leisured. They are the ones who can pursue and collect diverse beautiful things. In my experience, however, you won't find many rich men who think books, let alone the delights of study, are worth the effort. Too many other pleasures beckon the wealthy from all sides, so that they are more likely to want to pursue familiar pleasures among friends than to join us in exploring unfamiliar texts. If by chance they do become interested in these, we wonder whether they will be as successful in this as they hope. It is abundantly clear, if one considers the matter from all sides, that what we have already spoken of is true. The life of the studious is by its very nature burdened with many serious difficulties. From childhood on through every age, as we have seen, they are pressured and loaded with work, and scholars' nights as well as days are never free of anxiety and striving, so that it is implausible that they will find much there that smacks of even a little pleasure. One of the greatest pleasures, for instance, and one worthy of a free man, is to wander through cities and regions, to gaze upon temples, theaters, fortifications, and all sorts of buildings, to walk in places which, by nature and by human labor and design, have been made beautiful, welcoming, and secure. Serious students, however, are quite deprived, are they not, of such delights? It is hard to take along a lot of books while traveling, nor does one find much time to read when sightseeing. Of course, nothing will hold you back from roaming with great enjoyment through the provinces if you think you can be a learned man without reading much or often. Beware, however, for it may be that travel is not only inconvenient to the pursuit of learning, but ought to be viewed by scholars as more dangerous for other reasons. In particular, because scholars, even if they stay in their own country, incur much disapproval for taking part in small pleasures that do not even amount to major distractions. To take just a few examples, who does not see at weddings, concerts, singing groups, or young people's games how scholars are looked on with scorn and even hatred? Everybody thinks it becoming in a young man to play the lyre, to dance, and generally to practice the pleasing arts, and people consider these appropriate activities for the young. Those who are even moderately skilled in such arts are generally welcomed, and are popular. If they are credited with some such ability, they are invited and asked to join in. But not the young scholars. They are pushed away and excluded. Even if they show their wan faces at such occasions, people consider them either ridiculous or burdensome. And if they try to participate, how they are laughed at, and what disparaging remarks they get to hear. Who doesn't look down on a singing or dancing scholar? They'll soon find that they are seen as mimes and actors of the silliest sort. And with the awareness, if they are men of feeling, will come regret and pain. Thus, what brings others lightness of heart brings dejection to the scholar. What brings others praise brings them condemnation. What brings others invitations brings them an invitation to leave. So young men devoted to study are not unreasonable, in my opinion, if they foresee that they may not travel in other regions for pleasure, since even in their own country they are not allowed to take part without shame in agreeable and joyful gatherings. Thus, if they have thought of gaining any sort of fame or noble reputation, they will stay nicely shut up at home, renouncing elegant, pleasant, and admirable things, and forbidding themselves all access to these, in order, as their work requires, to dig most diligently through their books. Indeed, they will not permit themselves any pleasure in exploring external things that might distract their minds and disturb their concentration. Next, after these distractions, one thinks of the pleasures of love, which I wish the serious students to forgo entirely, for wise men have taught us that these pleasures are by nature harmful to all, but they are much more evil and pernicious for the scholar. Who with a mind occupied by love will be able to focus whole and steadfast attention on the texts? Who can then be fully absorbed in his work, intent on the teachings, ready and able to store up and retain them? Who, when captive to the madness of love, will have the willpower and intellectual vigor and enthusiasm to perfect himself in any noble art? Don't we know how love usually affects people? Sapping energy, corrupting conduct, perverting the intelligence, loading the mind with obsessions, filling the intellect with errors, driving a man to madness. These are its well-known services, the gifts that it bestows. But I won't go into all aspects of such pleasures, lest I become too involved with them, nor discuss how much more difficult it is for scholars and writers than for other people to be successful in these pursuits. How great the contrast between the handsomeness of courtiers and the sad squalor of scholars. I won't go into the luxuries of dress, the leisure time a suitor must have, and all those kinds of requirements. Let us take all that as said. Everyone knows that in these things, scholars and writers score very low. I do want to make myself clear on one point. For serious students, all pleasures are a bad idea and harmful. The customs associated with conviviality and with Venus, first of all, as everyone knows, invite the mind to relax and neglect matters of duty. They turn it away from persistence in reading, without which, and an immense amount of it, a man is sadly mistaken if he thinks he will somehow be an outstanding scholar. I don't know what it is in study, but characteristically, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you do not know, and feel that you should study more zealously. Meanwhile, the odors of food and wine, and those of Venus, cause the senses to empty the mind and fill it with shadows, to spatter the intellect with dirt, to dull the powers of perception, and to occupy the seat of memory with doubts and suspicions and with various amatory images that thoroughly perturb the spirit. So it is that the mind which is caught up in pleasures and set aflame by amatory appearances will be constantly agitated, looking outward under the influence of an endless flux of unstable wishes and expectations. Who could be less apt and less skillful as a practitioner of the advanced disciplines and noble arts than a man thus love-struck in spirit and mind? Scholars, therefore, will receive no pleasure, or very little, from food and from Venus. They will have minimal periods of sleep and rest, and allow themselves only rare and carefully rationed participation in games and festivities. They will always act as if restrained by a law that belongs to their kind of work, a law that makes it impossible to depart without shame from their eternal meditations and ever-present intellectual concerns. For they know that, unless they work consistently, even the hardest and most intense efforts in the field of letters will be wasted. A brief period away from study has the power to disperse more material than many long hours of application can restore. Things placed in the memory slip away faster than they can be rememorized or recaptured. The various kinds of sensual pleasure, if permitted to scholars in small amounts, must be pursued in a very restricted measure, and, if extremely harmful, must be assiduously avoided. One cannot honestly say that serious students can somehow indulge in recreation without loss of dignity, or linger in pursuit of diversion without undermining their work. Can a man enjoy refreshment of spirit, in any case, when he is not unmindful that great expectations are fixed on him, and that, if he does a mediocre job of meeting them, he will be disgraced more than any poor wretch? Will he really act with carefree and unburdened spirit if he can look around and see that his relatives, friends, and acquaintances all desire and expect some great achievement from him? And on top of that, what if he is not unaware that there are rivals, backbiters, and destructive critics, not a terribly rare type of men, prepared to find fault and speak slanderously of him? Through negligence or desire, or for the sake of pleasure, he does something that prevents his attaining to the highest level of intellectual competence. What will his thoughts be when he indulges in pleasure, he who was destined for an occupation full of labors and dangers that held the promise of greatness? Won't he be cruelly tormented all the time by worry, anxiety, and a certain fear of disapproval? I think that he who knows these things and understands that he must, by hard study and relentless application, meet family expectations, escape the efforts of envious men to bring him down, avoid damage to his reputation, and attain some sort of glory, will choose not to take up the many heavy and harsh burdens that await the studious rather than to embark on a scholarly career and then give it up. For this presents a terrible dilemma: to leave the hard, harsh, difficult field of letters with unavoidable disgrace, or remain in it with extreme and relentless efforts and great hardship. Once having started, you will be afraid to turn to lighter things and abandon serious study without some immense good reason. You will be forced to choose which burden you can bear with less harm to your pride: the frank admission that your mind is not good enough for scholarly work, or the implication that your spirit and character are too craven to stand up under the strain. There is a further problem. Scholars, if they change their minds, being unpracticed and ignorant in all other arts, can discern nothing outside of books to which they can devote themselves with honor. What then? Is it gratifying to the scholar's heart to realize that, if he leaves his chosen pursuit of the loftiest knowledge, he is destined for an abject and almost shameful future? And that, therefore, he must sweat perpetually in bitter and unceasing toil? What will shame you more deeply among your kin than not to be what you strove at every age to become? To show the world that you are not very learned, after all, precisely in the field you always cultivated to the exclusion of all else. To fail to shine in the field where you spent enough time to have attained excellence. Will it really be a trivial matter for him to withdraw at some point from the continuous labors of scholarship and let everyone see that he was slowed down or broken off from his chosen path to glory? Wretched the man who, for the sake of pleasure, runs right into the sword of critics and gossips. Not least likely to be harmed by pleasure are those who discover, belatedly, that, because they dropped their work or even just took a vacation, they have wasted all their preceding years of labor. If a man realizes that this will happen, as indeed it will, how can he actually enjoy any recreation? When he happens to encounter some comfort or enjoyment or some sweet pleasure, even as he reaches out for it, sharp anxiety about his honor will make him feel faint, and fear of a desolating loss of reputation will terrify him. No wholehearted joy or celebratory moment or happiness is possible for you, my scholarly friend, as long as you are always caught up in study, wrapped up and buried in manuscripts. No ecstatic pleasure and light-hearted soaring can seize you if you partly desire the huge burden of study and partly are afraid to put it down. I won't remind you here how great is the anxiety experienced by those who long for glory, who want to surpass all rivals, or at least to be surpassed by none. All this aside, the life of the studious man, unless I'm mistaken, is by far the most painful life, especially if he has any longing for the things that a young man of generous disposition is naturally somewhat inclined to want. For if he wishes to turn his mind and hand to horsemanship and the training of dogs, or to athletic games, or to other activities proper to a free man, how sadly he will abandon all pursuits that bring dignity and honor to youth, and for very shame at his own lack of glory, shut himself up in libraries, permitting himself nothing, however fine and noble, but midnight oil and books. Not without great agony, believe me, do we abandon pursuits that others praise so much, knowing they would turn us away from study and bring down eventual scorn on our heads. Indeed, men who usually sit in judgment and censure all conduct take a heavier line with scholars than they should or than they do with others. "What's he doing out at this time of day? It's not right. These clothes are not appropriate for him. We don't approve of the company he keeps. This place is disreputable. He shouldn't be there. This is not proper conduct for a man in his position. Those words he used are disgraceful." On and on. We are all watching the scholar with infinite dislike, looking for the chance to tear apart his reputation, so that, unless you want to be thought of as an irresponsible dandy and shady character, it's obvious that you have to live, not according to your own judgment and free will, but to suit the narrowest prejudices of the common people. What happens if, by some chance, you decide to ignore public opinion? When you wish to buy clothes, isn't it true that your library will say to you, "You owe me that money. I forbid it." If you wish to pursue the hunt, or music, or the martial arts, or sports, won't the book say, "You are stealing this energy from us. We will not bring you fame and reputation"? If you inquire into technical knowledge, or painting, or three-dimensional design, the philosophical disciplines will react strongly. "This is the way you defraud us of your energies? From you we will withhold knowledge of the highest things." If you want to refresh your spirit by a country excursion, I am not speaking of travel to distant places, the vocation you have taken up will pull you back from there to books and writings. And if you do not, with much labor and long hours, devote yourself totally to these, the books themselves will threaten you with shattering disgrace. Serious students must, in addition, deprive themselves of the pleasant, consoling company of their fellow citizens, must enjoy solitude, must avoid all discourse except the kind flavored with scholarship and a certain elderly sobriety. To them, the leisure to chat with friends, to walk around, to make new friends is simply forbidden. Some hours are given to reading, others to listening, and very few are left at their disposal. Almost no time remains for pursuing unalloyed pleasure. What a life of self-indulgence! To relax or slow down the labors that keep him in chains is plainly forbidden. He lives according to the hostile judgment of others, the resources of youth, the sweetness of the prime of life, the best years, and indeed all the years of his life must be entombed in piles of paper and dead sheep, as I may call books. The scholar is as much confined as if serving a life sentence, and necessity pits him always against nature. If, then, every pleasure serves to distract the scholar's mind from his work, if, as it seems, an infinite number of pleasurable pursuits are out of bounds as harmful to his vocation, if the scholar is required to renounce all these, what life that men lead is harder? If the scholar is never allowed to take time away from his studies to explore and observe, to enjoy himself, to extend the periods of sleep and leisure, or to pursue any personal advantage, if, on the contrary, the moments that he does not owe to his books are few and far between, who can possibly dare to say that he is a man of books and learning for pleasure's sake? But I would not want to obscure the true nature of scholars by concluding that they devote themselves to books with no idea of pleasure. They could not perform such great labors without some notion of pleasure in their minds. There are those who willingly go into mourning because they take pleasure from being considered very faithful and true to the memory of friendship. Many actions by which we satisfy convention and public opinion seem less painful to us than they really are. The pleasure of study, however, is such that it might better be called pain. Sedentary all the time, reading all the time, thinking hard, always alone, renouncing festivities and play. I'm not so bitter and hard a man that I would dare call this a pleasant way to live. There is a special sort of pleasure in avenging injuries, in plotting conspiracies, in assaults and battles that lead to your overcoming enemies by your own powers. Still, hostile conspiracies and hatred are extremely painful. What happens in the pursuit of letters is similar. To satisfy the desire to learn is indeed a pleasure, but the very hard work of study and the accompanying anxiety that oppresses the spirit always bring more mental torment than joy. So, if we indeed take a certain pleasure in learning, huge cares and labors undermine it. There is a big difference, moreover, between the burden of fighting the intrigues and assaults of enemies, which is experienced relatively briefly, and a scholar's daily anxiety, which is perpetual and immense. For there are innumerable things in books that are supremely worth knowing, nor is it easy to describe how the desire to learn presses upon a scholar. He may participate in difficult scholarly debates, or explore some elegant, worthy, and learned subject. While he does so, he does not sleep. He does not eat, does not rest, and feels almost no satisfaction. The desire to know and to remember it all is constantly gnawing at him. He takes on immense projects, is entangled in an array of possible rhetorical devices, is constantly tense. On top of this, he is always coming across things previously unknown to him. He encounters in his reading adroit, subtle, and clever ideas, finds some unusual illustrative anecdote, or learns some new refinements of the power of persuasion. These things provoke in him the desire to learn more, and he is unable to set limits or stop, nor is he granted any peace of mind as long as he has not cleared up every obscurity. Thus, as you see, the scholar is a very complex puzzle himself, and neither physically nor mentally ever, or hardly ever, gets any rest. Bleak solitude, hard labor, endless hours, great anxiety, difficult questions, total absorption, intense anxiety, as there is no pleasure to be found in this man. So in his whole life, there is almost no break in the onslaught of work and worry. That's how things are, and therefore I think this can be said of a scholarly life. No prudent person will be lured into it by hope of pleasure. But perhaps you think that the idea of acquiring wealth and power, or gaining honor and status, may be a reason for the learned to choose this life. Since we said that after treating of pleasure, we would discuss wealth, let us now consider how the study of books leads to prosperity. I deny that wealth results from scholarly excellence. I do not deny that it is possible for someone to become moderately well off who devotes himself consciously, as he should, to intellectual labors. I want it understood, however, that such labors do not enable even the most covetous and diligent practitioners to accumulate really great wealth. If I show that this is the truth, it will be perfectly clear how little wisdom there is in dedicating oneself to learning in the expectation of riches. Why is it that, of the many men of learning whom we see in every region, we see so few whose wealth is impressive? I have myself been able to observe some among their number who were not poor, of whom I have been able to determine without insulting anyone, either that they were not extremely wealthy, or that they had gained their wealth in other ways, not by their learning. If scholarly ability helped one to become wealthy, how is it that we do not find all men of learning equally fortunate? Why do we see many outstanding scholars in humble circumstances? Whence comes this discrepancy between scholars who labor in dire poverty and a single individual of better than mediocre intellectual attainments who rejoices in ample means? Shall we deny because of this one case that study does little to foster personal prosperity? We are more inclined to conclude that men of letters are all poor because, being occupied with study, they neglect all else, not only their health, but even more their domestic affairs, and seem either unaccustomed or unable to take much interest in their finances. There is another reason, it seems to me, why the learned are excluded from material success, for they acknowledge a different passion and a different ability rather than the passion for profit and the talent for making money. What they are taught by good books is modesty, magnanimity, virtue, and wisdom. With hope and zeal they apply their talent to acquire these traits, which forbid concentration on the pursuit of money, and on a multitude of other pursuits. For a rightly directed mind does not dwell among perishable things where wisdom and virtue are given a low priority. Men are praised for putting aside covetousness and training themselves to esteem, not the wealth which is denied to the man of learning, but the marvelous truths he can come to know. Now, one may well ask what ability and what steps do lead to wealth. It has been said that there are two ways for mortals to become rich, either by the help of fortune or by the application of knowledge. And this, I think, is correct. By fortune, we may become rich through inheritance, some legacy, or gifts and largesse of the kind that come to us by chance. Or, on the other hand, we may grow rich by our own doing, by industriousness, as in business, or in paid services, and the rewards thereof. Let us inquire whether study can take us on either path. Since we set out to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of learning, perhaps it is not even appropriate to discuss the good or bad fortune that befalls learned men, since the opinion of all good authors is that fortune of whatever kind is to be borne and not to be thought about. For this reason, though we shall treat of these matters and not neglect whatever points are relevant, we shall be so brief that I may seem to have deliberately omitted more than I decided to include. I do not want to seem over-interested in these matters, lest I be accused of disrespect for scholars. Now they say that wealth grows rapidly when money comes in thick, and fast while expenses are moderate and infrequent. A neat formula. The household store increases when you add more each day than you take away. But it is just the other way with men of learning, since they receive meager payment and, at every age, spend lavishly. No wonder, then, that they are poor. If anyone doubts that the study of books involves great expenditures, I have clear and relevant story to show. Not only that vast sums are drained away by this pursuit, but also that it brings major and unending harm to the scholar's family. I'm thinking of something I heard in Bologna, where I was a student, from a certain honorable citizen, the father of a legal scholar, who told me more than once that there was nothing he regretted as much in his life as having let his son embark on these studies. He said it had led to much trouble, first because he felt that his son's knowledge was of no practical use, as he never wanted to distract the young man from his work to assist the family. His son, therefore, had come to count for him as one of the useless members of his household. If he had not chosen to have him pursue advanced legal studies, there were many things he might have taken care of which his father now had to pay others high fees to manage, fees that greatly reduce his profits. Things would have been very different if he could have used his son, and not outsiders, in his business. The returns would have been very little reduced by fees, nor would the family have been forced to waste money on various major expenses incurred by the son. Masters had to be paid, money given to grammarians, dialecticians, other teachers too, books purchased, then more books, and more books after that, so that there was no end to the bills of scribes and others. On top of this came those forms of ostentation associated with the achievement of the doctorate. How much was given away and dissipated? What big sums were demanded for clothes and university gowns, for a celebratory feast, even for remodeling the house and embellishing it? Plus all kinds of additional craziness, until almost the whole fortune of the family was exhausted. If only there were some limit to this kind of thing, instead of expenditures growing from day to day, both at home and in public. Formerly, he lived in the private, frugal, and honest style of his ancestors. But now, with the gown of the doctorate and the increased celebrity of his name, everything had to be more elegant and showy. The father could never hope to receive sufficient compensation for all this. To this he added another good point, well known to others no doubt, but new to me. If the money lying idle in those books and clothes my son acquired had been invested in business, as it might have been, it would have grown into a fortune, and I would not only have kept what I spent on him, but taken in an additional income from year to year. The loving father often talked this way of the damage and the loss he had suffered. He further declared that he was not so much troubled by his son's immoderate and wasteful expenses, as grieved by the realization that he could not hope for much from the young man, whom relentless scholarly labors had turned into an invalid, and who, as his father observed, would take no rest even in his weakened condition. The grief-stricken father would try, with parental solicitude, to offer his son some sort of play or diversion, and would frequently order him not to mortify himself to such an extent with sleepless nights and fasting. But to these demands the son regularly replied along the following lines. "Don't, my father, don't try to hold us back from our chosen path. You should realize that I have a duty to pursue my work with this kind of zeal. If you are wise, if you care for our dignity, urge me to keep more vigorously at my books. Order me in the future never to leave the library at all. Beware, lest by your direction you may tend to undermine the reputation which our care and diligence has brought us. I would rather hear you ordering me, father, to uphold with all my will and strength the trust my clients repose in me, and the causes of friends that I have taken up, for I am sure you can easily understand that it is to fulfill their expectations that I am thus defending my long hours. Therefore, father, Let me carry on. This prudent citizen and father, in part because he was really afraid that this way of life was undermining his son's health, tried everything, though in vain, to get him to drop his studies. The loving father thought he would rather have a robust, happy, and healthy son, even if not so erudite, than one who was nervous, sad, anemic, and ill. Often he vowed that he would rather have an ignorant son than a supremely learned one. For, he said, it is enough to have a son who causes no harm to his country and family. It was truly great grief to him that this one had to be maintained at such a cost. This very unassuming man came to his view of things not because of some prejudice, but by experience, as he watched what the scholar was costing him. If an upright citizen is worthy of belief, and this man, among the most respected in his city, bore witness, as I have reported, with full agreement from his hearers, shouldn't he convince anyone that letters are not the road to wealth? Doesn't he offer excellent proof that preparation for a learned profession not only does not bring wealth, but involves a sad and exhausting life of heavy burdens and labors, a life to be avoided? And even if he, a father who had kept his son at home, felt this way, what will fathers say whose sons are living in distant cities, where none of the fruit of the family's land can be used to sustain them, where not the least thing can be had without cash, where physical needs and care of the body must all be paid for by draining the father's coffers? If clothing is needed, if they want books, if they are ill, which happens all the time, how much money is to be thrown into this bottomless pit? It is hard to describe how prodigal young men tend to be, far away from intimidating presence of their elders, how freely they entertain and give presents to their comrades. If you calculate all that in, you will realize without a doubt that those who study spend far more money while they devote themselves to books than they will ever recoup by the practice of a scholarly profession. So, what sure and great gain is to be anticipated at the end, to justify first throwing away your entire fortune? A wonderful career, this, which first absorbs the father's goods and exhausts his inheritance from his ancestors, then offers only illusory hopes. So, we see what comes of study, what failure awaits those who try to make money out of scholarly training. It is known that a good income from any of the arts is acquired, either as frequent small earnings or as earnings that are large, though infrequent. Unless I am mistaken, no art earns sums that are at once great and frequent. Great rewards are earned by vast and unceasing labor producing highly specialized and original work. Such work is usually beyond the artist's capacity, and such rewards beyond the buyer's. But what I want to establish here is that you, the student, should not hope to get rich from the meager fees you will earn from teaching a child, for writing a book, for pleading a case, for curing a fever, or for expounding a mass of things concerning law or whatever. Indeed, such earnings barely cover daily necessities, and they come at such long intervals that they can only allow you to accumulate savings slowly, arriving very late at wealth. But men of letters are not never rich. I don't want to seem stubborn. I admit that some of them sometimes are not wretchedly poor, but if they are really wealthy, we think it is from some source other than their learning. Perhaps they illustrate the attainment of wealth by the exercise of avarice, crime, and fraud, which dirty money they may try to cover up by the splendor of a reputation for learning. That, in my opinion, makes them doubly guilty. First, because they aggrandize themselves through evil, and second, because, with their vileness, they bring down the honor and dignity of letters. Is it inevitable, then, that honest men of learning will be poor? Indeed, they will if they choose to abound in knowledge rather than cash, in character rather than precious metals, a richly furnished mind rather than a richly furnished home. What if they pursue both literature and wealth? They will hardly be equally outstanding in both. And why not? Because the passion of a man dedicated to knowledge is different from that of a man whose passion is for acquisition, and totally opposite. The one group spends time and energy on usury, theft, rapine, and crime. What could be more foul? The other seeks respect, praise, and the acclaim of posterity. What could be more beautiful? On one side, we have those who prefer amassing gold to glory, wealth to fame, perishable material things to the gratitude and goodwill of their fellow citizens. On the other are those who hardly care to spend anything except to support solid and whole personal goodness. What men of learning and students of the noble arts scorn, acquisitive men pursue. While what scholarly men seek is of no interest to the acquisitive man. To attain their goal of aggrandizement, moreover, the covetous will make use of robbery and avarice, while men of learning, in enhancing their good name, take delight in liberality and justice. But to put an end to this discussion, here is my view. Learned men will not become rich, or if they gain wealth by their learning, they do so wickedly. For no one whose spirit is not conniving preys on others, not to go into the other vile ways of the covetous. No one who is not degenerate chooses to put elegant learning second to money-making. No one who is not deeply corrupted will think of making learning a form of commerce for his own enrichment. If, nonetheless, contrary to all tradition and ancient precedents, anyone should become justly rich for his learning, he clearly must be more at ease with fortune, more knowledgeable, more authoritative. His friendships must be greater, more numerous, and more lasting than those of other men. His good nature, flair, intelligence, craftiness, and cleverness must be more suited than other men's to please all ears and accommodate all opinions. Such must be this man of learning. And while the city gladly entrusts him with the fortunes of all, he may display abundant wealth and frequent rewards. But truly, men of such high reputation are rarely encountered. And I must add, anyone who wishes to be favored by a great many people must exhibit not avarice and the kind of skills that lead to accumulation of money, but kindness, liberality, and even prodigality, traits, as you know, not very helpful in gathering wealth. Or let us hypothesize that there are many whom the whole city dares to trust, so that all jobs of litigation, of oration, of healing illnesses falls to them. I say that all these commissions, taken together and given to just one learned man, would not, in my judgment, may the gods help me, be so lucrative and so numerous as to make that man truly wealthy. How many illnesses, or rather plagues, would it take? How many quarrels would have to fill the civil courts? And what hunters of unusual opportunities to make money would we have to be, good gods, before we could earn a just wage by literary skill? Before we would be able to live in an honorable way, not by the largesse of others, but by our own earnings. Where does all this take us? Obviously, to the realization that not one scholar can ever, by his own meager earnings, become rich, or at least hardly one of the many who try. Nor do I feel that we should listen to those who would bring up the saying, "If you don't cheat, you won't make money. If you don't catch it in a trap, you won't catch profit." For the art of making money is very different from the art and dignity of those who are learned. But there are numerous and sure ways outside of scholarly activity to make money by honest application to a variety of civil arts. Too many, in fact, to list here. Let this be clearly understood. All other arts or skills will bring in money more easily than the study of books. If you choose a military career, for instance, it will often happen that you gain a great deal of wealth compared to the little you would gain from erudition. Where there are armed soldiers in the field, many ways open up to gain riches, even to rise to the highest pinnacles of wealth. But if you want literary jobs that pay, you must be very humble and very mercenary. What if you are a businessman? Won't you make as much money as you want? Won't there be ports and regions and peoples everywhere who will look to you to bring them goods? Or if you practice agriculture, what way of life is more blessed? What more fruitful, profitable, and respected occupation could you find? Only agriculture can give comfort, peace, and freedom to the ignorant, but can also make learned men happy. For no expectation of returns is surer than that given by a well-cultivated field, while at the same time the country provides leisure to live well and blessedly away from all noise and bother. In addition, there is nothing more valuable and perennially useful than what is gained by agriculture. But the praises of agriculture and other profitable arts will have to wait for another occasion. In all of them, and in all other arts and occupations, making money is, in a certain sense, logically part of the work. In scholarship, by contrast, the rewards that come naturally are elegance of thought and moral refinement, which prudent men generally consider the purpose of their study, so that it is more becoming to bear poverty with fortitude for the sake of knowledge than to gain wealth without honor. In case there are many men so shameless that, in disregard of the sacred dignity and moral code of learning, they have let their greed convince them that, with fraud and deceit, they can make money by the choice of a scholarly career, I want them to know they are greatly mistaken. For there are infinite number of possible accidents that in fact prevent all but a very few mortals from reaching the point where the first monetary rewards of study are available. Let's omit here the possibility that the father's fortune may be exhausted by the cost of studies, before the student has reached the level of skill required to support himself by the sale of his learned services. It's very well known that the man who wishes to make money from academic knowledge cannot begin to sell anything until he has proved himself to have some extraordinary level of knowledge. Hence we see them showing off whatever brilliance and learning they possess in speeches, disputations, and debates, at schools and gymnasia, and public occasions. Nor is it permitted to go on from there to making money unless they get people to think that they are considered learned by the public. This, they believe, will lead more readily than actual merit to the earning of money. So they want to be called doctor and see men admire their gold clasp, which is the sort of thing they emphasize, as if with these symbols they have great knowledge, and without them have learned nothing. Now, it seems highly appropriate to ask whether they return home with the gold clasp and the authority of a doctorate before they have sweated at hard labor to the age of 30 or more, greatly reduced their patrimony, and ruined their health. To this, must we not add another 10 years at least before they can establish the reputation and record of accomplishments necessary to make venal use of their scholarly learning? Not less than 40 years have been lost before these covetous men can possibly earn money, at the last period of life. For how many men can you mention to me who even attain this age? How many, out of 1,000 men, do you think, even without the anxiety of a scholar's life, even without the concerns that oppress his spirit, even leading a carefree and happy life, live beyond 40? If few among those who lead an easy life do so, surely you will find many fewer quadragenarian scholars. For none of them is by nature so robust that the labors, long hours, and other harmful conditions in which they work do not nearly destroy them. The health of studious men is fragile, their life precarious, their lifespan necessarily short. It will help to make the argument clearer if we reduce the issue to numbers. Men of mature judgment, whom I have asked from time to time how many men out of 1,000 they think arrive at 40, usually, and in my opinion correctly, say that not more than 300 out of 1,000 men arrive at 30, let alone 40. They also say that it is rarely possible for a man under 40 to provide properly for a family. Such was the answer they gave when I asked them. Hence, not to pass too lightly over this point, which is central to the subject of our discourse, let us go over our circulation of life chances to select those men of letters who are able, at a certain age, to earn considerable wealth. Then, if we find ourselves longing for lucre, let us realize how we must live, what proportion of learned men we must belong to, and what eminence we must first attain. Let us make the attempt. Of the 300 students of letters whose lives are prolonged to the age of 30, I asked you, how many are so free of misfortune during their whole lives, so spared from everyday evils and injuries, and so endowed with sufficiency, comfort, and freedom, that they never have to break off their studies because of some cluster of disturbing events, but can in time reach the highest pinnacle of knowledge? Don't we know how full and ample are the ideas found in all the arts, and how feeble is human intelligence to cultivate that vastness? Our reason and our moral faculties may, in the course of events, become faltering and weak in the face of fortune's blows and the intrigues of men, which can make it difficult indeed to become outstandingly skillful in any art, but surely most difficult, it seems to me, to take in the whole mass, so to speak, of learning. Let us then come to a consensus as to how many of our 300 long-lived persons will not be driven by various misfortunes to end their studies and desert the field of letters, or at least to interrupt their work. To decide correctly, we should perhaps first consider how many cases of abandoned studies we know, a huge, almost uncountable number. Then remember how much easier it is for an event to put a stop to the student's persistence in his work than for him deliberately to take it up again later. If you reply that nothing ever makes you interrupt your literary work, surely you're either excessively fortunate or not much of a scholar. For in every sort of life we see every day that our studies, labors, and projects are interrupted by strokes of fortune and by various happenings. The impact of war, local outbreaks of disease, and sometimes plagues. The spinning of fortune's wheel, illnesses of mind or body, or such external pressures as poverty, attacks of enemies, animosities, and various other calamities can at times interrupt our career, and so can injuries, losses, and problems, things life is full of, that demand our attention. For these reasons, the wise men whom I queried on this subject gave the following answer. There are usually about 100 out of 300 whose studies survive these evils without detriment. We do not reject this number given by men of good judgment, though I myself would set my estimate lower. But let us be generous on this point. 100, then, out of 1,000 students arrive, despite life's hazards and the influence of chance, at the point where they can make money from their learning. We have already come down to a tenth of the whole group. I posited 1,000, we are left with 100. Again, I ask, how many of this 100 do you think have the remarkable memory, intelligence, and talent required for the practice of higher learning? For not all who wish it, but only those to whom fate has given the ability as a special gift, are able to grasp the immense scope of learning, the memory and almost divine intelligence, which a certain special fate must lend to students of the highest arts, are granted by nature herself to very few. For if fate greatly endowed Hortensius with memory and Cicero with intelligence, it hardly granted any special glory of this kind to the many other rhetoricians of their time. But we have strayed beyond the bounds of what we promised. We promised a bare discourse, honest and satisfied with truth alone. So let us avoid all amplification of our topic and get back to the point. Those who are not unsuited by their intelligence and powers of memory for the cultivation of learning are said by some to be many, by many to be rather few. We hold a position that takes something from both sides. I say that of 100 who complete their studies unimpaired in thought, faculties, and functioning, 10 may be gifted enough to attain praise for their scholarly work. But I don't know if even 3 of this number will be so attached to study, so in love with and eager for knowledge, so dedicated, so courageous and strong as to keep going despite all those troubles and anxieties which, as I have mentioned, go along with studies at every age. To the precariousness of man's fate, the uncertainty of fortune's gifts, and the frailty of human nature, if we add the extreme labors required by intellectual work, labors which, as if indeed it were known that the good are all ignorant when it comes to extorting money, and inept when it comes to arguing a case. Yet if we judge correctly what is the expertise of highly educated men, perhaps flattery, sarcasm, and unscrupulous cunning would not outweigh the knowledge possessed by men of modesty and candor. Yet at present the crowd is more pleased with malice than with righteousness, with deception, frivolity, and insolence than with humane and modest conduct. And it is the crowd without whose approval the man of learning can never escape poverty. The crowd, unable itself to beat the cunning bent on conquest and pillage with which their masters enter into lawsuits, when they see schemer colliding with schemer, glorify the one who wins by more successful scheming. Thus, if an unscrupulous, learned legalist takes up an unjust case, they will call him a great master, the best of men, and a great friend. They have come to think deception a virtue. They admire the art of creating a mask and a false image as a remarkable mobilization of knowledge. And they believe that malice and wickedness and deliberate misinformation are derived from recondite knowledge. When a man is good and just and holy, when he argues cases for the merit they have in terms of justice and equity, when he stands for law and truth, not employing deceit and audacious lies, not shifting his allegiance at will, not hoping to win for the sake of money, but fighting for the sake of honor, they call him useless, ignorant, and a loser of cases. They never waver in their hatred of sincerity, never stop drawing people away from virtue, so that not only the venal, but even men who only want to earn their daily bread by their hard-won knowledge are driven to the kind of betrayal of decency I have described. Men of learning who are greedy for wealth gain it, as we see with our own eyes, by avarice and crime when cunning and deceit are called for, while good and straightforward men are left without clients. Ho, cruel fate of studious men! What is their prime misfortune? The labors of 1,000 men, their innumerable worries, their excessively long nights of work, the incredible labor that grows from day to day will bear some fruit, for not more than 3 of them. And those fruits belong to the one who practices deceit, to the one who, to force fortune's favor, subordinates intelligence to cunning, intellect to mendacity, and his life to habitual vileness, the one who knows little but is called learned, whom the arrogant judgment of the ignorant crowd singles out for esteem. Thus, a single opponent of all good learning, an enemy of good customs, one who condemns just causes and is prepared to commit any crime or outrage, seizes by his effrontery and presumption the wealth due to all others, by his grasping overshadows the good name of all the rest, and by his ambition suppresses their name and fame. Oh, hard reality that, of 1,000 men who study, hardly one, and that one precisely, the most iniquitous, attains to wealth. All you others, if you remain decent and honest, will be beggars, and even if dishonest, still may not be able to gain riches, for fortune, as is well known, does not smile consistently on all. Because of these circumstances, we must consider anyone who devotes himself to learning in the hope of wealth extremely foolish, for the services of learned men that lead to pay are either dishonest or servile. Further, as you have seen, the rewards, whatever they may be, trickle in meager and late, to only a few and not to the good, while even if they were large and honorable, they certainly would not be sufficient to cover previous expenditures. What do shrewd observers say on this subject? Will they deny the truth of what I've said? I don't think they'll dare to contradict the true and well-known points of fact I have raised, but perhaps they will bring up a rich man who has some semblance of learning, and ask, why don't I think it would be possible for other scholars to become rich? And if I chance to reply that the man they have mentioned gained his wealth by evil means, obviously I'm hateful for having judged negatively of my colleague. If I say men like this are few and far between, perhaps they will say, given the minuscule number of the learned, even one is enough. They will mention all those who pursue learning for the sake of gain as evidence against me, and as critics who do not agree with me. Let me, therefore, restate my points most briefly here and again illuminate this issue of our wealth, for I think it will help to discourage the money-hungry students from an imprudent choice. I beg them to put aside their greed for money, if by any chance they have such feelings, and take a moment to read our arguments. If they do, they will never again approach books and knowledge without having made up their mind to scorn such acquisitiveness. So, let us get to the point. It is clear that for all the multitude of studious men who have distinguished themselves in the almost infinitely varied fields of knowledge, there are only three professions that will bring monetary reward. One is the profession of those who record cases and contracts, another of those who are masters of jurisprudence, and the third of those who treat the sick. All the rest, it seems to me, are not more known for their erudition than for their poverty. And that is not unfair, for only the arts that bring physical or material benefits are created and adapted to make money, while the arts that nourish spirit and mind lead to something else, something greater that is incorruptible and eternal. If you deny this, I ask you, have you found that grammarians, writers, and philosophers do not devote much effort to their work? Then let me ask, how many of these have you found who were rich? Haven't you noticed that almost all of these forms of learning go around begging for teaching positions in private households? I'll tell you what you might well answer. That philosophers despise wealth as an ultimate evil, so they deserve to be penniless and wretched. The three mentioned above, however, the scribe, the physician, and the lawyer, believe and teach that learning is superior and useful to the extent that it brings practical advantage. Other knowledge of the mind, of the nature of things, of the ways of mankind, and of other important and beautiful matters, is despised and rejected in an ignorant and ugly way by the people of the city. Only venal learning is prized. But I'll never value wealth of these three kinds so highly that I do not find more worthy those who, for the sake of wisdom, bear poverty with fortitude. Even scribes, I've noticed, if they are really honest, are more commonly poor than the pettifoggers and informers among them. Indeed, I doubt whether there is any wealth in that profession not tainted by fraud and treachery. I dare say this with due respect to the good ones, for if one speaks up against the bad ones, one should be understood to favor the good. In the case of unscrupulous scribes, I think that we can believe their evil reputation and that they are even worse than people think. A sign of their utmost wickedness is the way they are always walking around without a pen behind their ear. They are not able to show their profession along with their wealth, for everyone knows how little gold flows from the scribal pen. So if a scribe does not wish to admit to theft and fraud, he must give the impression of poverty. Let others think what they like about scrupulous and unscrupulous notaries. To me, it is implausible that any one of them grows wealthy from the small fees he can charge for simply writing up documents. Of medical men, I would speak at more length. Did I not see many good men and good doctors wrestling hard and bitterly with poverty, yet always ready to struggle on? The general public, however, takes the view that medical men, for the sake of money, wish for and follow precisely the things that other men consider sad and horrible, like wounds, disease, plagues, and death. I leave it to the judgment of others whether, in making a fairly large income from these horrible things, they live avaricious, cruel, and desperate lives. I must touch lightly on this subject for the sake of brevity and also to avoid seeming to dwell too much on things that could bring disgrace on learning. So, let me say nothing of fraud, betrayal of trust, false witness, corruption of contracts, and alteration of wills. And likewise omit discussion of the administration of poisons, augmentation of fevers, use of drugs and medications that make illnesses worse. And let me cover with silence all the other wicked and base things that are done by money-hungry scribes and doctors. Nor shall we discuss how the work of greedy scribes and doctors exposes them to bitter enmities and to infectious vapors. It would be offensive to linger over servile, obscene, and sordid work. A true intelligence, and one raised by the teachings of the great writers to nobility of spirit, surely could not and would not desire wealth obtained by vileness. Excellent minds prefer a moral life to riches. The truly learned despise crime and dishonor more than poverty. No one is so dense that he does not utterly despise the shameful, nefarious enslavement of greedy scribes and physicians. Other men, whom we consider slaves, are taken prisoner in war or captured by pirates, and go involuntarily into servitude. But physicians and scribes choose by an impulse of their own to become slaves. Slaves try to win the favor of their masters and thus attain liberty, working hard and loyally as honorably as they can. But notaries and physicians, in order to gain money, do not refuse to carry out the vilest tasks. Slaves are willing to face danger and even death for the well-being of their masters, whether because they hope for freedom or because they appreciate the care and love they have received. But physicians and scribes willingly and greedily take on quarrels, diseases, contagion, and danger of death for a stranger simply because they are attracted to the transaction by a little heap of coins. What can I say of our lawyers that is truly good? What can I say in praise of canon law and civil law? For it is commonly said that these disciplines bring gain, while the other arts all gather only straw. Good God, big piles of documents, fat manuscripts, heavy portfolios, and how heavy, for God's sakes, become a complex apparatus that would bring anyone who took it to the tavern near the civic buildings a lot more money if he charged the customers admission than lawyers receive from their clients. For all their formal and organized pomp, and for all the books and libraries of books on shelves in their houses, just think. Do you suppose anyone has the financial resources to purchase all those books without using up his whole fortune and more? And wouldn't it be the greatest folly to pursue wealth by spending so much? Aren't people who want to gain wealth by buying so many books with such an expenditure of money very much like the men Caesar described as fishing with hooks of gold? It is folly not only to want to pursue wealth by spending so much money, but also to expend for that purpose such efforts and such enormous amounts of time. Tomorrow, says the client, you must plead my case. And he gives you a modest sum, the rest being promised for later. Whatever is offered, you accept it, and spend the whole night looking into books by the light of the lantern, with freezing feet and hands, looking for phantasms, thinking over stratagems and all that is in the books, bringing anxiety, weariness, hunger, and cold on yourself. The next day, you bring to the case a hoarse voice, a twisted neck, red and watery eyes, and a spirit not less thirsty and anxious for money than eager and willing to inflict harm. And you recite at the top of your lungs paragraphs and terms from the law woven into endless, highly detailed arguments. You burst all the seams of your miserable heart. You are not afraid, for the sake of payment, to fight and quibble with the most powerful and eminent citizens. They threaten you, revile you, swear at you, cast blame on you. Unhappy man, you expose your reputation and your back to all of this for the sake of money. That's how it goes, doesn't it? When they labor for the money they want, when they proclaim and exclaim, when they suffer malice for a price, plead the cause of others, enter threateningly into their quarrels, and do all things that this order of the educated, known as lawyers, consider appropriate. Anything, in fact, that may bring monetary gain. Don't they even see how they are placed in public and horrible slavery? What a way to make money! These things not only fail to make them rich, but actually ruin their families, even if their fathers were rich, make enemies, and, with the greatest expenditure of labor, involve them in servile bargains. But perhaps someone will object as follows. Isn't it true that when men return home after years of study, they have enough authority to gain favor in society and to acquire wealthy wives? No one is so stupid that he doesn't want connection to learned and famous men. To this, one might quite appropriately reply, how could a man of learning, unless he was crazy, choose to enslave himself just for the sake of money? A wise man desires freedom above all things, and more than anything he avoids any kind of slavery, but especially slavery to a woman. Any kind of servitude must be totally alien to one who cherishes wisdom. And how wrong it is, then, for knowledge to give us authority so that we can enter something we consider honorable servitude. We should renounce the authority and reverence attached to learning rather than willingly appear to choose slavery for the sake of money. Anyone whose mind and inner counsels would rather take wealth with servitude than glory with liberty merits no authority at all. Yet, what could be clearer than one's own servitude, indeed, in serving another's purposes, pleading another's cases, and making the quarrels of others one's own? What is clearer than that those who pursue big dowries willingly do just that. Don't we know how lawsuits unceasingly and steadily consume the energy of relatives, of relatives of relatives, and of their friends? Don't we know that these people will ask for the unpaid labor and assistance of the learned one in their midst? Who would deny, moreover, that it is vilest servitude to submit to the assaults of a wife who is always talking about and insisting on her family's wealth and importance? That kind of thing always accompanies lavish dowries. Poor wretch, for the race of women is stupid, arrogant, quarrelsome, bold, insolent, and by nature aggressive. In this sort of marriage, what sort of wife do you think you'll get? Spoiled by consciousness of her wealth, she will spend more than you, or rather she, can afford. Having been raised in luxury, she will go wild with her abundance of ready money. Your wife will impose numerous rules on your conduct and frequently accuse you of being nothing, O sage, without her wealth. But it is more helpful not to speak of the nature and folly of women than once again to pour out, as it were, the endless and familiar litany. I only want to make sure it is accepted that, as they say, nothing is more unbearable than a wealthy woman. Therefore, let us scholars not become so interested in gaining wealth through dowries that we do not despise servitude more than poverty. Let us grant for a moment, however, that, as they claim, it would be suitable for men of learning to gain wealth by marriage. Who would dare most improperly to counsel a fortunate and wealthy mother to give a virgin daughter with a large dowry to a penniless scholar? Won't the mother say, "No, indeed, I forbid our daughters being given to this half-alive, rude, and gloomy man of letters"? Won't she also declare, "I want my daughter to be given a man, not a teacher"? And the girl herself, as her opinion on her future, won't she say the same as her mother, her mind being inclined towards some other suitor and desiring for herself something other than an ample supply of philosophical sayings? And won't her brothers prefer a family connection with someone charming and urbane? So our scholar will be sent off, disgraced by the judgment and opinion of the mother, the brothers, and the girl herself. Why am I lingering on this point? What if impoverished scholars do strive to gain rich dowries? I ask you, aren't there wealthy men who won't reject a wealthy bride? Certainly there are, but if they existed, my dear scholar, I urge you to get away from them. Keep them out of your life. With all your Minerva and Pallas Athena, despise acquaintance with such persons. Do not invite comparison of a poor fellow with a wealthy one, nor of your pale and gloomy countenance with that of other young men. Do not expect your authority to matter to a girl more than good looks. Go away. Flee. Hide yourself in your library. An athletic, handsome, attractive, and charming young man will make sure with all his skill and ingenuity that you do not take away his beloved. You'll be laughed at, graceless and poorly clad scholar, if you compete in matrimonial matters with a nicely groomed and polished lover. And if you show up pomaded and painted, you will lose all the authority and dignity of a man of learning. You'll say I'm hard, not wanting scholarly men to marry. I want to be anything but cruel to scholars, yet not so merciful as to spare them the burden of marriage entirely. What sort of wife, then, do I think a learned man should take? First, I advise any poor man to avoid marriage with a poor woman, for that is the ultimate evil. Second, I warn him not to desire a young female, for youth is an age unfavorable to scholars, and offers them little security. I know what I'm talking about. But let's not give examples. Let the scholar choose some little elderly widow, then, who is less likely to look down on him than other women, for this sort of elderly widow is driven by her children's defiance and her neighbors' insults to display herself in public, wanting to attract a man by her money, either so that he may provide protection from her persecutory in-laws who drag her daily into the courts, or so that she may be able to relax at home without anxiety and loneliness. And learned men consider they have done well for themselves in getting this kind of dowry, even if it involves lawsuits and terrific enmities. If I seem to be joking in this discourse about matrimonial matters, just call to mind the wives of learned men you know. consider their ages and dowries, to say nothing of their faithfulness. It's important to remember how meager are the monetary rewards of scholarship, how slow, precarious, and paltry, and to keep firmly in mind what I have said about the enormous expenses involved, how heavy and constant these are, and how harmful to domestic arrangements all these considerations will show. I think that book learning is not of the slightest use for gaining wealth, but just the opposite, a great financial drain. So now I think I have fulfilled the purpose of the first two parts of my argument. If I had any doubt that I have made my point, I would give another direction to this discourse and show the servile and cowardly spirit of the man who undertakes scholarly labors for the sake of monetary reward. Nor would I fail to point out that excellent and learned minds must value the height and splendor of their honor and intellect, rather than covetousness and avarice. I could linger and luxuriate in this area, just to show my rhetorical powers, or to gain glory by my eloquence, which is obviously very small, or to give more proof of my wide knowledge. For this is material that is easy, ample, and spacious, and anybody could expound it easily with much rhetorical embellishment. But it would be pointless and have no relevance to our purpose to wander on, polishing the presentation of well-known and much-approved ideas. For who is so ignorant that he would not describe this kind of thing as morally vile, to use the arts as compliant servants of avarice and greed, arts that are meant to cure and eliminate diseases of the spirit, such as avarice, greed, and lust, and to develop and strengthen in the soul, which inclines toward evil, love of liberty, a sense of honor, nobility of spirit, and disdain for transitory things. To allow an intellect filled with the beauty of the disciplines to be crushed and ruined by the weight of shameful conduct. It is obviously contrary to our duty and disgraceful for anyone, including men of letters, not to lift up the soul as much as possible to what is honorable and good. Worse, to sink into avarice and disgrace. Worse, for a wise man to be guided by the attraction of transitory things. It is very bad to chase after wealth by usurpation of the authority of learning. Worse, not to use one's strength in defense of one's honor and liberty. Worse, to participate in unscrupulous monetary transactions. But let us not talk about all this, since I gave myself the task of going into nothing unnecessary to my argument and promised to be concise, as so far I have been, as concise as I could be. For this, as you have seen, has been a succinct and closely articulated presentation. So it will continue to be. Also, in so far as the magnitude of the subject permits. Very easy to follow and short. I've said that from the study of letters one does not garner pleasures or attain wealth. Now it seems I should address myself to the prestige and honors given to men of learning. It is perfectly obvious that honors, in full measure, are their due. For if honor is properly given as a prize for merit, who deserves it more? Could anyone deny? Could anyone be so monstrous as to reject this truth? That bringing progress to the arts through arduous and continuous labor, augmenting one's goodness and wisdom by devoting every age to study, spurning all pleasant distractions, rejecting all one's appetites, pouring out energy and money, thus giving up one's time and fortune to help and benefit the human race, deserves universal gratitude? Could anyone be so monstrous as to deny that these are precious gifts, that we learn from books to understand the noble arts, to strengthen good institutions, to appreciate excellent morals, and to cherish wisdom? And that therefore men of learning should rank above all other men, and all kinds of men? The universal understanding is that men of learning should not be slighted. We recognize that man surpasses all other living things in many ways, but most of all in that special gift which is knowledge and reason, that ability which can convince us that the minds of men are not in essence different from the minds of heavenly beings. Indeed, we see that all the things that move on earth and in the sea are cultivated and made useful in their abundance by the natural intelligence of men. Everyone admits that man is by nature the most honored of all living beings, and their king, in view of which, if a man possesses reason or mind, which nature has set up as the Lord of all things, in its most complete form, perfected by education, cultivated and polished by study and application, and is therefore much superior to others in reason and intelligence, doesn't this most excellent of mortals deserve the greatest honors and the reverence of all? God himself, who is highest in an infinity of other ways, is divine in part, and perhaps especially, because of his perfect discernment of good and evil, his perfect ability to choose the best and to rule the world according to reason and providence. If a man, then, manifests his knowledge and wide reading in this divine way, shouldn't he, of all men, receive almost divine honors? Shouldn't he rank highest? Why, then, should the knightly order take precedence over learned men in public processions? What knight is comparable to a sage? What an act of impudence to put a rude, ignorant, and usually licentious soldier ahead of all learned men! This custom began, I think, not by our ancestors instituting it deliberately, but by those very warriors putting themselves boldly and insolent in front. Unless indeed our ancestors considered knowledge less worthy of honor than gold. By some perverse reasoning, some evil custom, some unjust privilege, a soldier devoid of virtue, morality, and the splendor of wisdom, who wishes only to be noted for his accumulation of jewels and gold, takes precedence over a learned man, who, through virtue, intelligence, knowledge, and understanding of books and of the highest things, has attained a character that is moderate and pure. Let us leave this point regarding the wrongful elevation of soldiers, however, though indeed it is not irrelevant to our subject. Let us admit, moreover, that the military function is something of public value, that the soldier's own task and office are not a trivial business. His job is, with his own wealth, resources, and weapons, to protect, shield, and defend virgins, widows, the poor, and defenseless orphans, and all poor people, all the afflicted of any kind, as well as the whole republic. That is how I see the duty of the military, and others may judge how conscientiously knights perform it, and to what extent, therefore, they ought to be honored. No one can deny, however, that learned men by their studies are very useful to the republic, to the poor, and even to the wealthiest citizens. So, who could give any reason for somehow putting the stupid ahead of the wise, the ignorant ahead of the knowledgeable, and the useless ahead of the helpful, and the lazy ahead of the active and long-deserving? Nor is it only the military who defraud men of learning of status, for the learned are, in fact, widely despised. Can you show me any citizen somewhat notable for wealth and status who does not wish to be thought the best in every way? Can you show me one wealthy man who does not scorn poverty and therefore inwardly despises the studies and arts and knowledge of poor men? Where would you find a wealthy man so scrupulous that he does not consider it his right to be more regarded for his fortune than others for their virtue? Why on earth, the wealthy asks, should you prefer that learned man to me? Is not our country one and the same? Do you suppose my relatives, family, and clan are inferior to his? Does my perhaps not knowing as much grammar make my opinion and my vote in the Senate count for less? To us the city is free, and so is our mind. We are free to speak in our mother tongue among ourselves, and we speak it well enough not to be reduced to helpless silence. Let the rhetorician delight in the words of his precious authors. We tend to matters of business and acquire wealth, so our opinion in the Senate counts more. I know we succeed better than any literary scholar with his heavy rhetorical phrasing in establishing the authority of our wealth. We offer golden opinions. He offers opinions with laurels, and the laurel surrenders to the gold. You, who take up the cause of study, now stop glorifying the man of learning so much. They say, why should I stand up in his presence? Why should I step aside for him on the street? Why take off my hat? What is my business with him? So he knows books. What's that to me? Let him direct the games and instruct children. So he is able to cite the law. What's that to me? Let him shout and proclaim, write down things that are said, cheat widows, prey on those who have lawsuits. Let him confuse his little clients. Let him advertise his ability to counsel citizens. The town that's bereft of these advisers is better off than the one that's full of them. If he professes medicine, what's that to me? Let him cure the drunken, the gluttons, the big consumers. Let him sell as many drugs and perform as many filthy services as he can. What do I care? If he is learned in theology, what do I care? Let him please old widows with his long sermons. Let him rave in the pulpits if he wants to. What do I care? What harm can come to that man of learning? He knows it all, has learned everything, exhibits universal understanding. So what? If I ever need one of them, for a single coin, I can make him work 3 days and nights without stopping. Let them be happy with their empty discussions, but not bring their petty squabbles before the public. Better than that, let them return to the lanterns they stink of. And after that, dear gods, with this plague of men out of sight, there will not be the strife of litigants, the calumnies uttered in court. Quarrels and lawsuits will cease, and in the cities highest harmony will rule. Peace, established among citizens, will be unbroken, not by eternal lawsuits, not by endless legal bickering, but under the guidance of fair and good nature. A certain simple equity will be discovered in every case. These words, I call the gods to witness, I have heard too often from my fellow citizens, men who were neither obscure nor without distinction, and I have given them no response commensurate with my annoyance, lest they think me arrogant. For they were judging the question on the basis of ignorance, not guided by experience, nature, and a sense of justice, but by hatred and envy. It seemed better to be in a certain sense indulgent with them, who were refusing to acknowledge what they did not understand, and vituperating against what they were unable to comprehend. All I would ask was, for my sake, to speak more moderately and gently of good men. But they would go on with their raving. O mild-tempered, self-restrained city! Who has not heard the same stuff again and again in every public place? Who, if he's not altogether crude and vile, can bear to listen to such men? Who, that wants a bit of recognition, when he sees the utter indifference of wealthy men, will not begin to wish for money rather than wealth of knowledge? What will he feel when he hears a scholar called a servant or a cook, if by chance, as sometimes happens, he leaves his books to approach a group of citizens without having dressed up? If he mentions with some passion the thoughts that he has developed in reading, he may be called a marble bull or a ranter. An ambitious yapper, they will call him, if he shows some delight in a public display of eloquence and learned language. Indeed, to ask for any public honors and authority in this situation is to bring down the authority and dignity of learning still more. As far as honors go, we scholarly men are better off if we are dull rather than intelligent. For the custom of our fellow citizens is to laugh at the dull and make fun of them. But the fiery and active minds they describe as wicked and greedy, as a kind of men whom one should avoid, because with both natural intelligence and trained cunning they will do harm and hatch evil plots. So how will you, a learned man, present yourself? If you show simplicity, they say you are good but unsophisticated and useless. If you show that you are polished and discriminating, they will brand you malicious. What else shall I say of the way our people behave towards men of learning? It seems to be the nature of men in cities to be big talkers and nasty gossips, but they are most brazen and evil-minded in our Tuscan towns. There they mock everyone, defer to no one, speak wildly, and behave with insolence. I think I should actually give some credit for this to our people and to Tuscany. In the Tuscan cities, because of their ancient liberty, it is permitted to say and do things which, to those raised under tyrants, would seem carelessly spoken or intemperately done. It is the glory of liberty and its consequence that, as long as you obey the laws, you can choose your own pleasures and your own course. But let us return to our populace, who have always given the highest honors to gold and wealth. Indeed, it is no mystery why the crowd is moved, not so much by virtue as by outward splendor. For the ignorant are attracted by the things they can see with their eyes, while those things that can and ought to enlighten them do not move them. So the ignorant desire the riches they can see and disregard the wisdom they do not have, follow after property, and despise virtue. The wealthy man appears in public with a long train of friends and servants, expressing unmistakably by face and gestures that he has what it takes to help or harm people. To the one whose wealth engages their greed, the crowd offers applause as soon as they see his face and figure. As he comes nearer, they rise up instantly, for they suppose and expect that a man of such outstanding fortune should be made much of. Understandably enough, they put a man from whom they hope to get favors and money before any and all men of learning. Fueled by greed, then, especially in our city, the idea has flourished that highest honors should go only to the wealthy and fortunate, while accomplished scholars are considered objects of little future utility. Why not despise them indeed? I shall omit all sorts of further shameful insults the populace hurls at scholarly men. But let's not omit this one. They don't see why they should glorify our studious men who obviously omit in their way of life everything that is necessary for a good and happy life. You don't practice what you preach, they say. Thanks to the books you know everything. Thanks to the great and divine knowledge you gain by your intellectual labors, there's nothing you don't know. Why, then, are you learned fellows such stupid people? How crazy do you have to be not to learn, first of all, how to be comfortable? Aren't you ashamed of your wretched poverty? Why should we, for our part, make much of the knowledge you offer, when more of you seem hungry and thirsty than wise? Learn first to free yourselves from poverty, you men of learning, if you really want to seem wise, and then you'll earn praise for your lives. For the most part, as you see, learned men are held up to ridicule by every order of society, mocked by the crowd, laughed by everybody, despised by the many, and most despised when they have too little cash. If they happen to be well off, which is most rare, they know quite well that people honor them, not for their knowledge or books, but for their money, not for their virtue, but for their good luck. One observes how people get up, how they make way or show courtesy only when their eyes have first raked over the splendor of a scholar's golden toga. If the gold isn't there, if you take off the robe, they disregard you. This is the way men of learning discover how the world works. If your clothes are fancy, you are highly honored. Riches, to most people, merit respect and attention, and no one, however prudent, experienced, and outstanding for his knowledge and understanding of the highest things, will be able to give the crowd anything it admires and rewards with praise unless he enjoys popularity for his money and possessions. Perhaps we should consider such things as public office, positions in legations, and in the government to be greater honors than foremost rank in a procession or signs of deference in the street. But precisely these things, as we know too well, have long been claimed for the most part by gold. Perhaps the rulers of the Republic seem perfectly and rightfully placed in a position of high honor, being morally and practically of tested worth, men whom the Republic had trusted with its own great weight because of their faith and diligence. I cannot persuade myself that the Republic needs book learning in its magistrates more than the practical knowledge gained by long experience and practice. I think I should clarify this point briefly here. I have noticed that, in fact, the government rarely holds meetings to discuss the heavens and the planets, and never to discuss the nature of the gods, procreation, and the soul. Discussions in the Senate are sure to deal with war and peace, revenues and costs, the regulation and defense of all aspects of civil life. And so they rely not on philosophical reading, but on custom and experience. I don't hear them debate about the 7 planets, or about the wandering stars, or what can be known of the sun and the moon. So, really, the study of the liberal arts ought to be segregated and kept out of the courts and government offices. Further, those who consider themselves scholars would be better off if they fled such places entirely and remained content with their books, for they earn no public respect over there. If, however, they really desire participation in public life, let them take as much of a role as is proper to one neither called to it, nor, on the other hand, excluded. Let them work on writing up and witnessing terms of peace and alliance. Let them leave the rest of public affairs to the very knowledgeable and very virtuous men who have, by their oath, at the will and command of the people, taken on the responsibility. Men of learning indeed, who do not want to appear to have more knowledge and experience in negotiation than in scholarship, will make themselves useful in their own tasks, editing the public records according to what they saw themselves or heard from competent witnesses. Anyone who really wants to do the wise thing, in short, should flee all administrative work. It is not easy to describe how damaging all public responsibilities generally are. First of all, to any citizen who would rather be disentangled from business concerns and free, and second, in particular, to minds fully occupied with the study of the arts and intellectual disciplines. Here there are the disadvantages of government work. It detracts one's mind from one's private concerns, drags one into worry and envy, confronts with enmities and dangers, loads one with cares, labors, and embittering difficulties. All these things obviously are harmful to anybody, including men of scholarly inclination, and are therefore prohibited to reign for minds that have attained tranquility. What is more, even if you had heard that once men of learning were held in high honor, esteem, and admiration, these days a different spirit rules. Too many take up the study of books, and some are insolent, vile, and shameful. Today, while we see the most sacred scholarly studies infiltrated and disgraced by such dregs, the best and finest men who at one time preserved the purity of the liberal arts are driven to despise them. So they neglect these studies from which neither honor nor power can be obtained. And we have degenerated to the point where not only men of outstanding nobility and authority neglect the study of books, but really, no one takes them up except the most miserable and lazy people. Hunchbacks, people with running sores, twisted dwarfs, dolts, stutterers, men without spirit, and all the generally incompetent and non-competitive are supposed scholars. Those whom other civic activities reject think they are suited to make use of a literary leisure. Men whom insignificant little women turn down as husbands bind themselves to study. Those who are notable for intelligence, therefore, clearly see that they should put their energy into something more attractive and more advantageous, and anything rather than scholarship. Who can fail to see in all this that our citizens do not value education? Who can deny that the dignity and honor of learning has been ruined? Who cannot observe, as if painted before his eyes, the downfall and destruction of the noble disciplines and liberal arts? Who would not mourn for such a disaster, such a shipwreck of the literary arts? For storms and disasters have afflicted our way of life. Almost no one pursues the noble disciplines for the sake of his own mind. A few do so for the sake of honor, and an infinite number out of greed and the hope of wealth. Now, all the liberal arts and sciences, established as sacred possessions of the mind, lie in a state of servitude. Law, theology, knowledge of nature, and knowledge of human conduct, as well as all other marvelous fields of study meant only for free men, have been, oh hideous crime, put up for sale as if on the auction block. Innumerable slave traders in the noble arts buzz around bidding for merchandise, from field and forest, and from the very clods of earth and mud. There swarm a vast number of creatures, not men, but beasts born, to perform servile labors, who, abandoning their native countryside as unworthy, rush to sell and profane the disciplines. O plague of literacy! What is going on that men who should be wielded a pickaxe or a pitchfork are disrespectfully handling books and words? Men meant to herd sheep and inhabit stables are discussing and judging the fortunes of humanity. Those who should be governing sheep with their staffs now hold a scepter as they sit among the magistrates. They have left their sheep not for the sake of a higher vocation, but for a different image and place in society. Untouched by education, this bold and, as the poet says, gaping crowd has moved in. They aren't held back by any fear of disrepute, of dishonor, of moral filth. They are perfectly ready to perform any cruelty, tainted with every sort of crime and evil, undeterred by shame, by decency, by good education or the noble arts. They are guided in judging what is good and evil, not by virtue and wisdom, but by greed and avarice, equating poverty with misery, and seeing wealth alone as the highest good. And these men write up contracts deciding the fortune, fame, and the very life of innocent people. They don't hesitate, for the sake of profit, to bring plague and ruin on anyone at all. Bold and unscrupulous criminals, driven by greed for gold, they are afraid of nothing. The word, the noble arts, and sacred studies are theirs to sell, theirs to turn into pelf, knowledge of divine and human matters, guide to good conduct and true glory, discoverer and parent of the best things in life. Once you ornamented the souls of men, cultivated intelligence, conferred glory, grace, and dignity. Once you conferred your wisdom to the republic, and accustomed the whole world to act according to the highest forms of law and order. You, philosophy, mother of learning, I ask you, are you now supporting and serving the greed of the vilest and most degraded men? But let us stop our lamentation about the calamity and destruction that have fallen on education. Let us stop inquiring as to the cause of this degradation and downfall of study, for it is a vast subject and outside the scope of our undertaking. Let's stand only what we have tried, briefly but truthfully, to demonstrate, that in devotion to books you will find much work, no pleasures, great expense, little profit, many difficulties, many dangers, and very little authority. In the exposition of these matters I have tried to be brief and have deliberately stated many points without fully discussing them, outlined many propositions without illustrating them, have presented many ideas without amplifying them. This I have done lest I appear to condemn in excessive detail that to which I have been more than a little devoted myself. I do not doubt that our discourse, which, though sparse, meagre, and humble, has been consistently on the side of virtue, will go safely before the critical judgment of scholars. A discourse is sufficiently refined and ample, I think, that cannot be found to contain any lies or misrepresentations, sufficiently honorable if it lets no wickedness in. Let no one blame me, therefore, if I have chosen to appear not very eloquent rather than too sharp. Indeed, it is the furthest thing from my mind to disrespect the study of books. For love of these I have suffered great anxiety, labor, and discomfort. I have encountered injuries, losses, wounds, and calamities, while I devoted myself completely to learning, to the point where even some who supported my life both financially and by their confidence in me were unhappy about it. And indeed I endured poverty, hostility, and violence that, as many know, was not minor or trivial, done to me just as my studies were about to bear fruit, and I was able to bear all this with a strong, upright, and undivided spirit, only because of my appreciation and love for study. And of course I chose to continue in this way of life, not for pleasure, and not for money, which I could have gained if I transferred my activity from books to business. Indeed, as I lived on the resources of others, I might have put their considerable funds to whatever use I chose. Asking much from others, I could have been more generous in listening to their pleas. But knowledge, noble disciplines, and most abstruse arts were always worth more to me than all the gifts of fortune, and all the advantages. Let no one think, therefore, that the things I have said here express toward study resentment or finicky disdain. These things are so obvious and clear that I need not belabor them with eloquence. I hope, however, that our discourse may be of use to students in that they will hold on with all their sense and reason to what I have explained, and thus, with my help, if I have some effect, will study more diligently than ever, fully understanding that study does not offer pleasurable license or meaningless transitory rewards. The noble arts, moreover, bring not any, or at most a very meagre, harvest to men of evil disposition. Only utter fools, we think, opt for scholarship, hoping for anything other than knowledge of the highest things. It is proper for those wise persons who rightfully wish both to be and to seem learned, to burn with zeal for study, to read a great deal, and to consider it their primary mission to perfect not only their erudition, but also their character. Let the spirit of the learned be flamed with desire of a certain kind, not for gold and goods, but for the right way to live and for wisdom. Let them seek in books not so much the essential nature and causes of things as the nature and even the love of virtue and glory. Let them assiduously avoid idle pleasures, despise wealth, scorn ceremonies, try not to fear fortune, and focus only on achieving peace of mind. good conduct, virtue, and wisdom, for here is almost all that the noble arts strive for. What we have found in the writings of our ancestors all tends in the same direction, toward freedom from errors, toward love of truth and simplicity. These two things are the foundation and the pillars of a good and happy life. And if these are well set and well built, we go on to build well both a virtuous character and reason, the companion of virtue. The mind then enjoys the gifts of intelligence and wisdom, and the intellect, unperturbed by changes of fortune, stands victorious. In your practice of learning, therefore, seek after glorious wisdom, defend and preserve goodness with all your might. That is what the books themselves, if they could speak, would demand of you. Having squandered your health in long vigils, where are you going, young man? How will such labors be useful to you? What are you asking of us? By all this diligence and zeal, what is the point of these wakeful hours, anxious strivings, and all this thinking? Do you seek some gratification from tormenting yourself with cares? Do you ever give yourself rest? Do you hope for wealth while you learn from us not to fear poverty? Or have you somehow overlooked the fact that nothing belonging to us is for sale? Let it be no secret to you, young man, that we are more inclined to have our lovers poor than rich. For we know by experience that no scholar has become wealthy, but, immersed in the delights and luxuries that riches bring, he began to hate our presence and everything associated with us. So, do you want power, honors, glory, and status? You are mistaken, young man. You are mistaken if you put public flattery and popularity above goodness. If you do not consider the game of fortune, the tumult of public life, the winds of popular favor far less important than knowledge and wisdom. Those things which are transitory, unstable, fragile, full of pointless effort, rife with fears and suspicions, fraught with mishaps and downfalls, who would compare them to peace of mind and stability of character, as well as to the beauty of the noble disciplines? Can you have missed, young man, the fact that virtue is all around you when you are with us? That we love no greed, no arrogance, no passion, no spiritual flightiness? That we demand a spirit perfectly clear of any malice, of any shadow of evil? Don't you see, young man, what light and splendor the wisdom we are talking about bestows on those who are dedicated to us, how it tends to make them luminous and glorious? Consider the full remembrance of forgotten antiquity and its wisdom that you find in us, which can help you rise above and endure any attack or accident of fortune. Therefore, let go of that greedy kind of mind. Let go of this desire of your spirit for exalted status. Flee from those false values of money, vain fame, and corrupt popularity that you introduce into your scholarly work. It is folly deliberately to pursue ends you cannot attain, but even more foolish to expend your energy for a kind of success which, if you are unable to attain it, will make you regret your wasted efforts, and if you do attain it, will make you ashamed of your corruption. With us, you will expend more moderate labor and show a more exacting kind of virtue. From us you will obtain not only knowledge of the teachings, which is rightly thought of as the companion of virtue, but with hope, reason, and thought you will become from day to day more imbued with perfect character. Learning and the arts give you this glorious thing, that you are free to aspire to wisdom. Virtue will bestow on you this divine gift, that you may reach peace of mind, praise and dignity, and happiness. For if, as you should, you put everything else second and strive for virtue, release from all vices will naturally occur, and reputation and glory will follow. For virtue is preeminent and outstanding, being linked and integrated with a certain divine power by which we are released from all vices and errors. This brings us praise and honor and maintains our whole and permanent spiritual happiness and peace of mind. He who embraces this kind of virtue in his soul, his will, and his conduct, who remembers that solid and real goodness is not found in the judgment of the multitude, but in elegance and splendor of mind, does not want to compromise with fortune. For him all the goods he possesses are found in himself, thanks to which he leads a life that is outstanding and blessed and similar to that of the gods. Since these things are so, young man, surrender to virtue. Judge fortune's gifts as none of them worthy of intense longing, none of them preferable to the goods of the spirit. For men who have proved their character, nothing is worth pursuing except wisdom and virtue, nothing worth fearing and fleeing except ignorance and vice. If a man wishes to cultivate his mind, therefore, he will inevitably come to despise, hate, and abhor those filthy things called pleasures, and those enemies of virtue known as luxury and riches, as well as all the other plagues that infest our life and our spirit, such as honors, elevated status, and grandeur. If you focus your energies consistently, young man, in the direction of the goals we have described, you will find that study is full of pleasure, a good way to attain praise, suited to win you glory and to bear the fruit of posterity and immortality. Thus it is, Carlo, my brother, that we, like our forefathers, are aroused and uplifted by the exhortation and admonishment of the written word, to pursue our studies in such a way as to prove our virtue to all, and allow no one to doubt that our striving is for wisdom alone.